a plan for the renewal of Britain. Rachel Reeves also vowed to boost spending on defence, transport and prisons.
The priorities of this spending review are the priorities of working people. To invest in Britain's security, in Britain's health, and to grow Britain's economy so that working people are better off.
The Shadow Chancellor Mel Strides called it the Spend Now, Tax Later review.
This spending review is not worth the paper that it is written on, because the Chancellor has completely lost control.
Disgraced film producer Harvey Weinstein has been found guilty of committing a criminal sexual act in a retrial in New York. The 73-year-old was found not guilty on another count relating to a second woman. The UK has reached a post-Brexit deal on Gibraltar for a so-called fluid border with Spain. The government says it safeguards sovereignty, jobs and growth. And the super yacht which capsized off the coast of Sicily last year, killing tech tycoon Mike Lynch, will be lifted from the seabed this month. A final recovery plan's been approved. In the city, the FTSE 100's closed up 11 points at 88.64. The pound buys $1.35 and €1.17. LBC weather, heavy rain moving northeastwards across western parts of the UK tonight, a low of 8 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening and welcome to Wednesday's Cross Question. I'm Iain Dale. It's 2 minutes past 8. On the panel with me, to my left, Rachel Blake is Labour MP for the cities of London and Westminster. Who ever thought there would ever be a Labour MP for the cities of London at Westminster?
I did.
Did you?
I did.
Did you expect to win?
On the day, I thought that things were looking good, yes, and we worked very hard for quite a long time in advance.
And she's a member of the Treasury Select Committee. Liam Halligan presents Planet Politics with Alison Pearson. It's a great podcast. He's an economist who writes for the Sunday Telegraph's Economic Agenda column. To my right, Dame Harriet Baldwin, Conservative Shadow Business Minister, former Foreign Office Minister as well, and MP for West Worcestershire. And next to her is Duncan Weldon, an economist who's the author of the new book, Blood and Treasure, The Economics of Conflict from the Vikings to Ukraine. He hasn't actually brought a copy with him, so I can't brandish it in front of the camera. Elementary mistake, Duncan, if I may say so. But we will talk about it a little bit later. The number to call, 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp us on that number too. Text 84850. And, of course, you can watch us on Global Player or the new LBC app.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, as I say, I suspect a lot of your questions are going to be on various aspects of the spending review, but we will take questions on any other subject too. But let's start off with Anthony in Ashford. Anthony, this is Ashford in Surrey, not in Kent. Hello, Anthony.
Good evening, Ian, and to your panel. Has Rachel Reeves done enough to save her bacon today, or is she for the chop at the next reshuffle?
Straight in.
Yeah, straight in. Liam, let's start with you.
Well, clearly Rachel Reeves was under pressure from the left of her party and even the Prime Minister to make bigger, bolder spending announcements. But that's, the internal politics of the Labour Party, which will probably decide her immediate fate. I'd have, as a person, just a citizen of the country, I'd have much preferred her to reassure financial markets about what she was doing. What basically happens in a spending review is that you can say what you're going to spend, but you don't have to justify how you're going to finance it. That's roughly how it works. It's a bit of an oversimplification, but that's roughly how it works. And I think at a time when government borrowing costs are so high, we're spending £105 billion a year on debt interest. That's almost twice what we spend on defence, more than we spend on transport and schools combined. That isn't only Labour's fault. The Tories handed them a pretty difficult situation, but the borrowing has expanded a lot more than forecast over the last year since July, at a time when borrowing costs are so high. What we call the gilt yield, the interest rate the government must pay, is now way higher than it was at the height of the mini budget crisis, so-called, in October 2022. And many people in finance, people I talk to, I'm a former financial services professional myself, are seriously concerned about the currency, about the possibility.
The pound's at its highest level for a long time.
Well, there are many things going on in the world, but borrowing costs are extremely high, Ian, and debt interest payments are the second biggest line in the government's budget. I mean, let's talk about the morality of that.
You're absolutely right.
And at a time like that, I'd have liked to have heard a lot more reassurance. Instead, I'm afraid Rachel Reeves has left the economy in irons, because now investors, wealth creators, business leaders, they're going to be thinking, should we hire more people? Should we expand? Because there's going to be more taxes coming down the line.
But the markets have reacted quite calmly. I mean, there's been very little fluctuation today, has there?
Yeah, but that's because she didn't actually say very much. The reality is, since November, government borrowing costs have been much higher than they were back at the peak of the crisis in October 2022. It's just the media doesn't really want to talk about it.
Why would that be?
Because I think there's a lot more... I think there was all the drama of October 2022, and borrowing costs did spike up quite rapidly at that point. I'm not denying that for 1 second. But as a taxpayer, as somebody trying to analyse the economy objectively, as you know I do, when you're paying £105 billion a year on debt interest, do we really need to more and more and more borrowing and spending?
And that's what, about 10% of what we... spend as a country.
It's a huge share of the tax take. As I say, it's almost twice what we spend on defence. Okay. It's more than we spend on schools and transport combined. That's just servicing the debt.
Rachel.
Well, I disagree with Liam's analysis, certainly about the politics and about most of the economics and most of what you said about public spending.
But you can't deny £105 billion.
But I can't deny that, and that's the bit that I agree with you on, that it is an issue, but what you missed was that it's one of this government's objectives is to bring that down, and the way of bringing that down is actually to invest in infrastructure, which is something that hasn't been done in this country for far too long. And if you look at the big parts of the announcements today around infrastructure, we're looking at significant investment in transport infrastructure, significant investment in affordable housing, and also really making sure that we're investing in the skills to build that. There are other parts of the spending review that I'm sure we'll get onto.
But you're borrowing all this money, aren't you? That's the problem. In
order to stabilise costs in the long term, and actually when we start to build that infrastructure, we had the planning and infrastructure bill in the Parliament on Monday to talk about the infrastructure that we need for the many new homes that we need to build. That building is going to create the jobs that we need to improve people's life chances and to start tackling some of the economic challenges that our country faces. So I agree with you about the debt cost being a problem. And what we need to do is invest in that infrastructure and in those jobs.
But a lot of people listening to this, well, I think what Liam said about the interest cost, the gilts, it will come as a shock to them, because if it's higher than it was after Liz Truss's mini budget, now that can be for a number of reasons, not all to do with Labour's economic policies. It may be an overhang from the last government as well. But surely that should be the number one priority, to get those rates down, so you're not spending £105 billion a year. But there was nothing in this spending review that gave us any confidence that was really at the top of the government's agenda.
Well, that's my point to you. Actually, stabilising our economy by investing in economic growth through infrastructure and jobs is part of making sure that we start to bring those borrowing costs down. I think Liam and yourself are acknowledging that the ingredients towards those high costs are not to do with this government and are to do with global.
Well, I think some of them are.
But I think that there are a significant number of other factors.
They've gone up from 4.5% to 5.5%. The 30-year gilt yield since October. As even rightly said, partly it's global, I understand. But we live in a global economy, and we still have to pay that money. And anyone managing a business, anyone managing anything in life knows that if your second biggest payment line in your budget is servicing your debt, you've got a problem. And I agree with you. In the very long run, big infrastructure spending can lead to more productivity growth, can lead to higher growth. In my view, the best way to engender growth in the economy right now is to stop raising taxes so much and to scrap the employment rights.
Let's hear from our other two panellists. Harriet.
Well, to go back to Anthony's question, I think that whether it's Rachel Reeves, who is Chancellor, or another Labour politician, we've obviously got a Labour government for several years, and as with all Labour governments, they seem to be on track to leave unemployment higher than when they came to power. Inflation is up, is almost doubled since last July. Unemployment is rising. You're seeing virtually no growth since the election in the economy, and you're seeing debt rise and the interest rate bill rise in a way which is very worrying. There's growth in the number of businesses struggling, and it's all because of the choices that the Chancellor made, not only to freeze many of my pensioners on low incomes last winter, but also to tax businesses in a way that's forced them to shed jobs and has actually caused the economy to really grind to a halt. So I think it is a concerning fiscal backdrop.
Hang on a second, because the growth figures in the last quarter were 0.7%. That's higher than any other G7 country.
I think what you see in terms of the data since the Labour government came in is much slower growth rate than the growth rate that they inherited. And you're also seeing a clear increase now in terms of the number of people unemployed. And so if you looked at yesterday's labour market report in detail, you can see that the number of people on payrolls is dropping very sharply.
Duncan.
I mean, I'm a bit more relaxed than I think Liam is about what's happening in the markets for government debt. It's absolutely true that the interest rate the British government is now paying is higher than it was after the Liz Truss mini-budget. That's absolutely true. The difference between now and what happened in the autumn of 2022 is, though, in the autumn of 2022, we saw an unusual spike in the cost of British government debt relative to other countries. What we've seen in the last 6 months is the cost of American government debt, borrowing rising, the cost of German government borrowing rising. The UK has just been caught up in this sort of global rise.
But are their figures higher than ours?
The US is about the same as ours. We've moved pretty much in lockstep with US borrowing costs since November. But I think, going back to Anthony's question about today's comprehensive spending review, in some ways the economics haven't changed. The really big economic decisions were made by Rachel Reeves at her budget last autumn. She changed the fiscal rules. She gave herself a lot more room for borrowing for investment whilst trying to cover current government spending with taxation. Those were the big decisions made then. What we saw today was some more flesh put on those bones. We found out where that capital spending is going. The government set out its spending priorities by departments. But there was a big shift, I think, politically in the rhetoric, in the language. If we think back to how this Labour government spoke for its first 6 months in office, it was very gloomy. It was this is the worst economic inheritance anyone's ever had. There's lots of pain to come. I think they overdid that gloomy talk. I think they hit business confidence. I think they hit consumer confidence. I think they're aware of that. And I think since January, there has been a big shift, starting with that speech when they announced the third runway, getting the go-ahead at Heathrow, continuing through today of investment, sounding very Gordon Brown.
And nobody is going to say that investment is a bad thing. But politically, it can be a bad thing because normally chancellors think in 5-year terms, thinking about the next election. A lot of the plans that Rachel Reeves has announced, not today particularly, well, some of them today actually, are medium to long term. And the electorate won't see the fruits of those until well into the 2030s. Now, that might be a good thing because we criticise politicians for not looking to the long term. But a lot of Labour MPs might be quite spooked by that. I mean, MPs, dare I say, who might be in, I don't know what your majority is, but I'm assuming it's that you would consider yourself in a marginal seat.
A marginal seat.
I mean, MPs in marginal seats are going to be quite anxious that she does actually do things for the short term as well. I'm
really interested in that question because you're saying this is medium to long term thinking, which is probably good, but MPs will be spooked because their constituencies won't see it soon enough. Well, but I I'm more optimistic about politics than that. I think that it's really important to think in the medium and the long term, particularly because we do have an infrastructure deficit in this country, and we do have a really serious housing crisis in this country, which is connected into our economics. So yes, I do have a marginal seat. The facts are on the table, but I think that people will recognise that if you do that long-term thinking and investment, there will be benefits. I think that businesses are acknowledging it. I think we don't talk enough about how unstable the economy and our politics has been for the last 10 years, and we have a huge opportunity over the next 5 years to establish long-term business confidence, a long-term confidence in the public sector to get some of these homes built and reservoirs and energy sources built. But the thing that people will notice soon is the jobs that are created through this investment. It's not just
what about all of the jobs that have been lost through the national insurance rise?
Well, on to Harriet's point, I see those unemployment figures, and of course you have to worry and look at what the cause and the consequences of those might be.
Did you accept that was a cause?
I don't accept the causality, but I do think that you have to acknowledge those facts, and like Harriet, I want to look into
it's sort of
about it.
Economics 101, isn't it? If you put a tax on a job, then you're going to have fewer jobs. I mean, it's just the way economics works, I'm afraid.
Well, also there are businesses that I've spoken to across a number of different sectors who have said that they acknowledge the reasons for the national insurance increase, which is to do with investing in our NHS. They recognise that we all need a healthier workforce, and that they aren't making those changes. So I think drawing out that causality now is not right. But I think we have to acknowledge those figures.
So employment is down 250,000 since July, and 109,000 of that 250,000 is in the last month since the national insurance rises. I understand what you're doing, and I'd do the same in your position, but I think it's hard to deny the causality. I'd like to say, Iain, and it won't surprise you, seeing as you were the publisher of my last book, which was on housing, I'd like to applaud Labour's announcement on social housing. I completely agree with the need for social housing, and I've said that for many, many years, and I hope that plan comes to fruition. To Duncan's point, Duncan, of course, is right. There's been, as I acknowledged in my answer, many countries have experienced a rise in gilt yields over recent months. The difference is with America is that we are not the world's reserve currency, as Duncan will acknowledge, given his
not sure America will be
sophisticated knowledge in this area. And we also, this is a slightly technical point, but we're going to hear a lot more about it if indeed markets do spasm, and I certainly hope they don't. It's my job to give responsible warnings based on fact. I'm not a sandwich board merchant, but I do want people to realise that many people in the media and political world are thinking about this. A lot of our debt is what we call index linked. Over a third of our debt is index linked. So it's the interest payments that the state must meet are linked to inflation, and that makes us uniquely vulnerable, I'm afraid, and I say that with regret. In terms of the more general picture, I think that we've now got a situation, and I think Mel Stride gave a reasonable speech. We are now in for a long, cruel summer where everyone's going to wonder where the tax axe is going to fall. I'm afraid that I sit on the board of various companies, various charities. We're not hiring. Hiring is at its slowest rate since the COVID pandemic because of the extra costs of employing people. A minimum wage increase for youngsters that was 17%. That isn't great when you're a student trying to get work, and the national insurance threshold on employer NICs has come down from 12.5 grand to 5.
We do need to move on because we've got lots of questions coming in, but first let's have a break. It's 19 minutes past 8.
LBC
apply.
Cross Question with Iain Dale. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
8:20 on LBC. Dame Harriet Baldwin, the Conservative MP, is with us. Rachel Blake, Labour MP. Liam Halligan. I think I didn't give the right title of your podcast, did I? I know why I said Planet Politics, because I used to host a programme.
I know you did.
So it's Planet Normal.
Planet Normal.
And he also does a Substack, which is called When the Facts Change.
When the Facts Change, indeed.
And Duncan Weldon is here. We're going to talk about your book in a few minutes' time, if you don't mind. Let's go to another question from John in Hammersmith. John, what would you like to ask?
Hi. I have to say some of the panel's negative comments about the spending review are somewhat disheartening. When the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, says that England is poised for growth because of this government's policies, and as Iain said, 0.7 already, and more to come. So I must say that we hope, and I got everything crossed. So it's given the
John,
apps.
What's your question?
Okay, so given the positive economic news that is coming out of this, it's reassuring that the government has found 2.6% for national defence. Given that, though, that the Secretary-General of NATO said that if we didn't get to 5%, we should all learn to speak Russian, is 2.6% enough to keep the Russians at bay if they should break through?
Well, Mark Rutte made that comment about needing to learn Russian during a speech in London on Monday. NATO members will meet in the Netherlands next week when he will attempt to convince them all to commit to spending 5% of national income on defence. Well, Harriet, you were a Foreign Office Minister. I guess
I speak Russian as well.
Do you?
Yeah,
do you? Well, yeah, you do too, don't you?
We're all agents.
I can count to 5. So, go on then. What's your answer to John?
Well, I certainly think it is a time in the world's history where we do need to step up in terms of defence spending. Of course it is. I think, we were very much, as members of NATO, on that path from 2% up to 2.5%, and it is a goal that keeps increasing. And I think we do need to be in a position of strength to ensure peace. I think we have moved, as a former colleague of mine put it, from a post-war environment to one where we are pre-war, and so we do need to think about how we prevent that from happening. And the way you prevent wars from happening is showing that you are strong, and you are strong as allies together in NATO, and that you are strong in terms of your ability to respond to any threats that may come our way.
Do you think that this 2.6% commitment is enough? And it was a little odd on the day after the Strategic Defence Review was published when Keir Starmer said, well, we've got an ambition to get to 3%. I mean, I don't really know what that meant. And then the next day, Mark Rutte talked about 3.5%. You think, well, hang on a minute. The government must have known that NATO were going to say that the next day.
Yeah, that was a bit of a surprise, and obviously it's the big NATO meeting in The Hague coming up, and President Trump will be there for that. And he's been sending a clear message since his first presidency that European NATO allies need to do more in terms of their defence spending. The UK has been one of the bigger defence spenders. A lot of other countries now increasing significantly. We are allies, we are together, and we've got to do that spending in a way that is where we get more by working together on the equipment that we buy than each country developing everything from scratch. So I think it's not something you can switch on easily, immediately, but it's something we need to be strategically planning to build our defence industrial sector, and that means being on an upward path in terms of defence spending.
Duncan.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should be clear about this NATO 5% number that's, doing the rounds, because it's not really 5%, it's 3.5%. It's 3.5% of your economy should be spent on defence, compared to the old measure of 2, plus another 1.5 on a sort of quite ill-defined national infrastructure that might help defence, which is really just so we can say to President Trump it's 5%, because he mentioned that number and we're trying to keep him happy. Yeah, I mean, that NATO target of 3.5% seems completely reasonable. It seems completely reasonable given Russian aggression in Ukraine. It seems doubly reasonable for Europe and Britain, given that, President Trump's commitment to the NATO alliance isn't quite that of previous presidents, that we do have to be thinking about, Europe taking more care of its own defence. We hope America is still a long-term ally, but that's less sure. So, yes, I mean, that's the problem when we relate it back to the spending review today, though, isn't it? That we've got to 2.6. There's an aspiration to get to 3%, and we are now talking about a cross-NATO target of 3.5%. Now, we don't know if that's by the mid-2030s or by 2030, but either way, I think it's reasonable to assume that defence spending is going to something like 3.5% of GDP. That might sound like a lot. It's just what we were spending in the 80s, the early 90s, till the end of the Cold War. It's an historically normal number, and it's what we should be aiming to get back to.
Do you think it matters if other European countries pull ahead of us in the percentage that they're spending on defence? Because, as Harriet says, sort of Britain and France have been the two main European countries spending more than anybody else. But I was reading an article the other day that reckoned that by 2032, there would be probably 7 or 8 countries spending more than we are. Now, does that matter?
It's a very straightforward graph you can draw. If you draw a graph of percentage of your economy you're devoting to defence versus distance of your capital from Moscow, it fits quite well. So what we're seeing is big ramping up of spending in Poland, in the Baltic states, actually in Scandinavia as well. They're going ahead of us. Germany, big change to their fiscal rules, let them borrow €500 billion for defence, another €500 billion for infrastructure. This is serious German rearmament. We might slip behind. And I think, in terms of British prestige, British power, Britain's role in the world, we have benefited from being one of Europe's 2, real military powers. If we start slipping behind, then that does hit, Britain's leadership.
Rachel Blake.
I do think it's really important that we work towards the 3 and then beyond. I think.
Do you think it should be more than an ambition?
Well, we talked about it being looking to it in the next Parliament and identifying that funding. I think it's a real challenge for us in order to make sure that we do that. But I think that we should. I think was struck by what Harriet said in terms of how important having that deterrent, and I think that's why it matters that we get there. I think also we need to think about the distribution of that spending in terms of cyber and security, and also the workforce within our armed forces, and making sure that we are recruiting into the armed forces, that we're providing them with the skills and the training and the homes that they need. But I think it's where we need to go, and the deterrent effect is really, really important here.
Okay, Liam.
Well, it's an increasingly dangerous world. I must say, as a kind of child of the Cold War, it's a shame that we feel that we need to normalise and go back to spending levels back in the Cold War era, given that the Berlin Wall fell. But we are where we are. I think it's a disgrace that so many people in our armed forces have to deal with really bad accommodation, for instance. That's been a big theme in my journalism over the last year, hearing from people in the armed forces who have got terrible accommodation, and I say that with regret. And I just try and draw the lens out a little bit. That there's a lot of geopolitics in the world at the moment. It's a very uncertain place. And that takes me back to my comments at the beginning. I would like to come back on the last caller in terms of maybe being too pessimistic. When you've got all these geopolitical squalls going on, and of course the West's relationship with China is very complex, though we haven't spoken about it, but it may be that the sun's come out today. Under cover of the spending review, China and America did a trade deal, we think, or a preliminary trade deal in London today, the 2 biggest economies in the world, has much, much more economic bearing.
That wasn't a big and beautiful one.
But that has much more bearing on the economic future of the UK, I would say, than anything that Rachel Reeves said. And I say that with respect. It's just because it is now the geopolitics stupid. The Suez Canal is still basically blocked, one of the main trade arteries of the world. That's pushing up freight costs.
It's still blocked.
Yeah, it's very difficult. You can't get insurance to go through the Suez Canal, right? Because of the Houthi rebels. Again, part of geopolitics. We need to keep our eye on the kind of geopolitical gauge, because in the end, the UK is a global economy. We are paying the debt interest that we're paying. The oil price is actually quite low at the moment. Yeah. It's down 20% odd since the start of this year.
Every time I fill up my car, I say thank you.
If that flares up again, guess what? The UK's fiscal accounts are not going to look good.
I knew I shouldn't have bought that electric car. Anyway, thank you very much. Let's move on.
It's not a Tesla,
John, no, it isn't a Tesla. No, it's an Audi. I always buy Audis, Harriet. Right, we'll move on to more questions in just a few moments. If you'd like to add to our questions, you know the number, 0345 6060 973. It's 8:31, news time with Daryl Jackson.
The Chancellor claims the Labour government is driving renewal in Britain. As she set out her spending review in the Commons earlier, she says there will be an injection of £190 billion to public services, including the NHS. The UK has agreed a deal with the European Union over Gibraltar's status after Brexit. It will see a fluid border between the territory and Spain. And the Beach Boys frontman Brian Wilson's died at the age of 82. His family's announced the news, saying they're heartbroken. LBC weather, heavy rain moving northeastwards across western parts of the UK tonight, a low of 8 degrees.
This is LBC.
T's and C's.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:33. Dame Harriet Baldwin is on our panel. Conservative MP, Shadow Business Minister. Rachel Blake, newly elected Labour MP for the cities of London and Westminster. Liam Halligan, economist and presenter of Planet Normal. Hooray! And his new Substack, which I urge you to all subscribe to. It's called When the Facts Change. Quite a snappy title, I like that.
Thanks, Ian. I've been working on it for some time.
And Duncan Weldon is an economist who's got this new book out, Blood and Treasure, The Economics of Conflict, from the Vikings to Ukraine. 30-second elevator pitch.
30-second elevator pitch is that the economics of war are really interesting and really important. So much of how our economies work today have been shaped by developments over the last few centuries in how the state works. Nothing has affected the state as much as war and preparing for war over the long run. And it's about the trade-off between economics and warfare. How warfare has shaped economics, how economic developments have shaped war.
How on earth do you research a book like this? Because I look at the title, I'm thinking I could never write anything like that. So I'm absolutely in awe of you for it.
Well, thank you. It takes a long time. And at the time I started writing it was before the war in Ukraine had started. So the last chapter was, had to be done relatively quickly. The entire book suddenly became more relevant than I'd hoped it would really be in the last couple of years. But it was, what it's like writing a book. The idea of a book is fun. Researching a book is fun. Having written a book and talking about it is great. It's that little bit in between when you have to just sit down and type up.
Well, I'm now not allowed to talk about writing books because Corey has invented a swear box that every time I plug my book, there's a swear box contribution. So he's going to be a millionaire soon. Right, let's go to Steve in East Grinstead. Steve, I'm coming to East Grinstead on the 4th of July to do a talk at in your bookshop on my biography of Margaret Thatcher.
Oh, excellent. Well, I'll see you there then, Ian.
I look forward to it. Do introduce yourself. What's your question?
Yeah, with no mention of spending on the police, is the government becoming soft on crime and soft on the causes of crime?
Well, as we discussed in the first hour of the programme this evening, which, Rachel, you weren't listening to because you're on a rival radio station, what the government is calling police spending power will be funded by regional mayors and police and crime commissioners raising council tax in their areas to fund increases to police force budgets. Given the amount of noise that the Labour Party made in the election campaign about the Conservative record on cutting police, I found this quite bewildering, this policy that effectively means that there will be fewer police on our streets in a year's time or 2 years' time.
So I don't think that there will be. There was a 2.3% real terms increase in the police. And
that's assuming that all these police and crime commissioners put the council tax up. This is not national government spending.
But that
smoke and mirrors, Rachel.
I disagree. I think that there's a commitment in there, and also there's a commitment for the 13,000 neighbourhood officers. We've also got a real issue with actually recruitment into the police.
Well, we had a Labour mayor on, Oliver Coppard from South Yorkshire, who said that it will not be possible to fund these new police officers given what they've announced today. And the Home Office budget is actually being cut by 1.9%.
There is that, and that's connected to the asylum hotels. But what I'm interested to hear what Oliver's saying about how they're going to be dealing with this in South Yorkshire. I think that we still are able to get there.
Sadiq Khan has been very critical as well, saying that the Met will, and in fact the Metropolitan Police Commissioner too.
I want to see. I think we've got brilliant neighbourhood policing officers in my patch and across London doing a really difficult job. I want to see the Met Police reforming, tackling the issues that they've got within their workforce and getting people onto the front line. It's both the issues about attracting people into the force and making sure they're getting everyone and all of their officers onto the front line. And I think that the police can step up to that challenge.
Even with reduced budgets?
I think we've seen really significant investment in their budgets, and we are seeing those increases through the spending review, and they do need to make sure
but
that
you're
they're
not.
being...
I mean, you're calling black white. There are no increases in the spending review. This 2.2%, it's entirely coming. They've put it back onto the Police and Crime Commission, saying, well, if you want to increase spending, you have to raise it from your local police precincts.
And or make sure that they are reforming the forces so that they're driving their officers to the front line, which I do think that they should be able to do. And we need to make sure that the police is an attractive place to work, and that is to do with reforming their internal structures, and also making sure that they're welcoming people into the force, because we do really need to see those neighbourhood police officers.
Harriet, obviously you're an MP in a rural area.
Yeah, different picture in West Mercia, where we do have a record number of police officers. And I met with the Chief Constable recently, and what he's having to do, because of the rise in national insurance, is actually reduce the number of non-officers. So the people who go and visit offenders in their homes, the ex-offenders in their homes, the people who go and deal with domestic abuse. A lot of the white more white collar roles in the police. He's actually having to cut those, and it's exactly the case as you were saying, Ian, that council tax and police precepts costs will have to rise at their maximum in order to deliver these numbers mentioned in the spending review. And of course, that's a tax on working people too. It's also a tax on pensioners. So, it's not at all clear to me that in terms of policing, that there are sufficient resources to go in to keep people safe across the country.
Liam.
Well, a lot of council tax, of course, where this funding is going to come from. I think Rachel's played her cards quite well, but she's been dealt with a huge respect to you, a pretty bad hand on this. A lot of council tax, about a third, goes on public sector pensions. These are the pensions of state workers, pensions that are far, far more generous than most people get in the private sector. This is the kind of third rail of British politics that no one dares to touch, but it's certainly true. The liabilities are absolutely vast, that even dwarf our official national debt. So that's one issue. You're right, the Home Office budget overall is being crunched. It's going down by 1.4% actually between this year and 28-29. It's no wonder that Yvette Cooper, a very experienced politician, fought so hard. She wanted to be seen to be resisting this settlement. In general, I'd like to see the police spend a lot more time fighting crime and a lot less time, knocking on people's doors for tweets that they might have done a year ago. Some pretty Orwellian developments we've seen in our country over the last couple of years.
Particularly with your podcast partner.
Yeah, particularly with Alison Pearson. And you're kind enough to mention Planet Normal. On Planet Normal, the latest edition, which we recorded today, one of the emails that we read out was we get many, many emails from serving police officers, men and women. They email us, we check their bona fides, they are who they say they are. They then trust us to read out their emails anonymously, though we know that they are who they say they are because we check their bona fides. There's a quite astonishing email from a serving police officer that Alison read out on Planet Normal. It comes out this evening, saying just how difficult it is to work under these tight budgets and how much they just want to get on with policing, but they keep getting woke directives from the College of Policing, and a lot of police officers didn't come into police force in order to do those things. I've got huge respect for the police. A lot of my family, believe it or not, over the years has been involved with the police. They have a really tough job to do, not just in the cities but also in the rural areas, and we need to fund them properly, but we also need to direct them to do the things that the public wants them to do, rather than virtue signalling on behalf of their bosses.
I don't know what those directives are, but I think that there's a bit of common cause in what we're saying about making sure that police can get onto the streets, because that's what people in my constituency and I think across the UK want to see, is police numbers on the street, and we have to make the police forces across the country attractive places to work.
Duncan.
Yeah, I mean, Rachel Reeves gave herself a lot of room for more capital spending. The current spending situation is tight. To govern is to choose. The big winners today were health, defence, housing. There have got to be losers, given how tight everything is, and it looks like the Home Office and police are a relative loser in this spending review.
Let's just get a follow-up on this from Michael in Rains Park. Michael, what's your point?
Oh, good evening there, Ian. Good evening, panel. My question is there a political consensus amongst all the parties in the UK that demands higher public spending than the country can afford? And I include the right-wing parties in this, because we saw how much the Tories spent during COVID, where Rishi Sunak ended up buying people Nando's and giving out bounce-back loans for people to buy sports cars. And Reform are, we can see that their spending plans are incredibly ambitious. And Liam's been through some of the figures. National debt at £3 trillion.
We're going to run out of time. So basically, is there a political consensus that public spending is far too high? I suspect there won't be on this panel. Very briefly from each of you. Harriet, you start.
I think what the public want to see is they do want to see good public services, and they want to see their public spending spent wisely and spent well and spent on their priorities. And I think they want it to be funded through progressive taxation that is generated
but is it too
through
high?
economic
Is public
growth.
spending too high?
And I think it has got very high. I think 45% is where we get to at the end of this spending review. So, I would definitely be in the camp to try and bring that down to a more manageable
Duncan?
level of the economy.
Yeah, I think public spending in Britain is roughly in the middle of the pack if you look at other advanced economies. The problem we have is that an awful lot of it is now geared towards health, towards older people because of demographic change. And a lot of it is now going on debt service because debts have been run up over the last 20 years. So for an awful lot of people, it feels like they're paying quite a lot of tax, but they're not getting the public services they want.
Liam?
It's a perceptive point by Michael. I think, in my latest Substack post, I ask who's going to stand up for reality, because the reality is that our current level of spending is unsustainable. The state now is 45% of GDP, as Harriet correctly says, up from just over a third 15 years ago. It's been a huge increase. Post-COVID, the state expanded massively. It's returned to a situation that's much higher than it previously was. And I do think the silent majority of British people know that we're spending beyond our means. It won't end well. They want some grown-ups in the room to actually say what needs to be said.
OK, Rachel, grown up in the room, public spending
Grown up in the room, speaking up for reality, all of those things. Thank you, Michael, for a really interesting question. I was interested in what you said as well. I think that there are areas of public spending that are too high because we're spending on failure. Temporary accommodation costs in London, £4 million a day goes on spending money in accommodation that should be in building new homes or helping people into home ownership that they want. There's one that I really want to bring down, and you'll be delighted to know that Spending Review is looking at how we might do that. So I think that the areas of public spending where we're spending on failure, look at the debt payments that we were talking about. We want to see those come down. We want to see more health spending going into prevention, and I think that actually we should be focusing on other areas where we could be supporting young people into work and in early years as well. So reduce that spending on failure and look at it to increase it in the areas that we really need to support.
Well, on that note of unity between Liam and Rachel, we'll go to a break. It's 8:46.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
Harriet Baldwin, Rachel Blake, Liam Halligan and Duncan Weldon are forming our perfectly formed panel today. We have a WhatsApp question from Nick in Slough. In light of events in California this week, particularly Los Angeles, what are your thoughts on the forthcoming Trump state visit? Former Foreign Office Minister Harriet Baldwin, aren't you glad you're not in the Foreign Office now?
Oh dear. Well, state visits are very important. I think the UK it does an amazing state visit, and it's wonderful when we have friends and allies like the Americans that we can welcome with a state visit.
That's very diplomatic. But, I mean, when you look at Donald Trump's reactions to these protests in Los Angeles, you think, well, surely the role of a president is to unite the nation and not cause further division. And he's doing exactly the latter, isn't he?
Well, look, from a policy point of view, there are quite a few things where I disagree with Donald Trump. I think tariffs are a very bad thing, for example. I think they're a tax on trade between nations. But the US is our strongest ally. We are great friends with the Americans. We have the biggest investment from UK businesses are in America. The biggest investment from American businesses are in the UK. It is our single biggest trade relationship. So, of course, we want to have a strong and special relationship with the Americans, and their head of state is Donald Trump, and he is coming for a state visit.
Liam.
Yeah, I think we need to be a bit careful here. I mean, I agree with Harriet. Tariffs are a bad thing. It may turn out, and I've written this since early April when Trump unveiled the full extent of his tariffs on Liberation Day. It may turn out that we end up with less tariffs across the world overall.
It may do.
We don't know.
That would be good.
We don't know.
But it's a very painful way to get there.
And it is the case, and obviously, Trump enjoys the chaos and having the power and so on. But it absolutely was the case that for many, many years, the world, particularly the EU and China, have been much more protectionist against America than America has been at the rest of the world. That's just axiomatically true. The US economy is growing pretty well. It has escaped recession. I think there's an element of optimism in the US economy at the moment compared to here. And just going back to an earlier question, yeah, we did grow in the UK by 0.7% in the first quarter, and that's great. But a lot of that was a sugar rush from public sector pay increases, and also 0.4 percentage points of that 0.7% was because exporters surged in the UK because they were trying to get in before the tariffs came in. So I don't think that 0.7% growth that we saw in the first quarter is going to be repeated in the coming quarters.
Rachel, are you looking forward to welcoming President Trump?
I think those scenes are troubling. I think that, as Dame Harriet has said, that America is our ally, and therefore decisions about the state visit will be made by a Foreign Office and have been established for quite some time. You asked for pithy answers.
Very diplomatic.
You asked for a pithy diplomatic answer. Well, you didn't ask for a diplomatic.
No, it's just we had your colleague Andy McDonald on Monday, and shall we say he was rather more visceral in his attitude to Donald Trump than maybe you are, but there we are. Duncan.
Yeah, I mean, I think, sending the National Guard and the Marines into Los Angeles is incredibly provocative. He gave a speech yesterday to mark the 250th anniversary of the US Army and said he was going to rename some forts after Confederate generals. So, happy 250th birthday, US Army. Let's name some of your forts after an army that fought against you. Seemed a strange tone. But he clearly loves the royal family. He clearly loves pomp and circumstance. And if that's a cheap way of currying some favour with him, then I think we just have to grin and bear it.
It's realpolitik, isn't it? Thank you very much for that, Nick. Ollie in Bristol says, are you bothered about having to show your passport to go to Gibraltar? Isn't this progress towards eventually doing away with these stupid post-Brexit travel rules? Well, as it was explained to us earlier, actually, these talks have been going on about this since way before Brexit. But Liam.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a shame that this quite important constitutional change was released under the cover of the spending review.
What are you alleging?
Pretty cynical. Good day to bury bad news. I just think it...
Is it bad news?
Yeah, well, we don't know, because there's no time to look at it, because, the political and media class have been rightly focused on the spending review. I mean, why do it today? This is the reason why people are so cynical about politics. It's obviously quite a politically sensitive thing. I'd like to have spent the day analysing it, by the way, but I've spent the day rightly, given my job, looking in the weeds of the spending review. I mean, why release that decision today? It looks bad.
To be absolutely, I have no desire to spend a day looking at the Gibraltar settlement, just to be absolutely clear.
Sure.
Just want to get that on the record.
Get that out there.
Okay.
Do you wish to cede your time to others?
And we can laugh about it, but for a lot of people, it's an extremely important constitutional
and
issue,
as long as
and
the
we
people
shouldn't
of
deride
Gibraltar
them.
are happy, which they seem to be, then that's sort of good enough for me.
I think the significant thing is, and Harriet, I'm sure you've met him, Fabian Picardo, is he the Prime Minister of Gibraltar? Anyway, the head
First,
of the First Minister.
Yeah.
Chief Minister,
Chief
that's
Minister.
the one. I mean, I kind of take the view, if he's happy, I'm happy.
Well, Gibraltar, let's just reiterate this, is British, has been British since 1713, and it is absolutely crucial that we look at the details of this agreement, because what you wouldn't want to have is for a British citizen not to be able to go from the UK to Gibraltar and be refused entry because there's a Spanish border guard there. And bear in mind that the airport may be used as a commercial airport, but it is actually Ministry of Defence property. So it is really crucial that we look at the detail, and forgive me for being somewhat suspicious about the diplomacy behind this, when with Mauritius we seem to have managed to hand over Diego Garcia to Mauritius and pay Mauritius enough for them to pay down their national debt and cut income tax for the people of Mauritius.
No, they've abolished income tax,
and yet that had been British sovereign territory since 1821. So I'm a little bit suspicious. I want to read the details, and I would be very concerned if British citizens were not allowed to travel freely to British territory.
Well, I suppose we can all be consoled by the fact that we're not paying the Spanish £30 billion for the
Well, how do you know? You haven't seen the small print
I'm
yet.
assuming.
And I'm just going to say the same on the detail. I don't know the detail of this announcement today.
I don't think we should assume anything when we're negotiating with the European Union. They've negotiated with us in an extremely cynical way for many years, and we should be looking at this closely. Well, I know that's not a fashionable view, but it's, I think, the view of the majority of British people.
Well, I must admit, I wouldn't have known about this today unless I'd seen a piece in the Daily Telegraph or on the Telegraph website where they were sort of outlining all the details, and they were effective. I mean, they were quoting somebody saying this is a betrayal of Brexit because British citizens will have to show a passport to go to British territory. Now I'm thinking, well, actually, we do have to have ID with us, even if we go to like Belfast or Scotland if we're flying. So I'm not sure that really matters, does it?
I don't know, Ian, because I spent all day looking at the spending review.
Right. Okay. Right. Let's go to our final question, our fun question from C in Surrey. After the very sad death of the genius that was Brian Wilson today, and we're going to be paying tribute to him in the next hour, I won't be singing a Beach Boys song, I hasten to add. I'm reminded that every December, without fail, the ending of Love Actually, with the people meeting in the airport to the sound of God Only Knows, makes me cry. Which movie ending can you not get through without needing the tissues? Duncan.
For me, it'll have to be Saving Private Ryan, and the final scene with Tom Hanks and Matt Damon, Tom Hanks dying and saying to Matt Damon, who they've been to save, earn this, because all of these people have died for you, which sounds quite aggressive, but I don't think it's meant in an aggressive way. It's sort of meant in a, an unironic American way, that, earn this, go and live your life, and then cutting back to him as an old man in Normandy at the graves.
Spoiler alert. Harriet.
Yeah, probably spoiler alert from me on this one too, but I haven't actually been able to watch it for many years. But I remember being in complete floods of tears at the end of Gone with the Wind, when Scarlett O'Hara is determined to build back.
Never seen it.
Do you give a damn?
Rachel.
I cry at the end of most movies. So the last movie that I watched and cried at the end of was Wall-E, where they get off the spaceship and they see that the Earth is coming back to life. It's a cartoon, it's a kids' movie, but it's got a lot where there's a lot to learn from it. So that's just one of many.
Liam.
Well, one of my favourite films of all time is With Nail and I, the 1987 film set in the late 60s. Superb performance by not least Richard E. Grant. At the end, when he's been left behind by the I character, whose name we never actually find out, Withnall, a resting actor who can't break through, he gives an absolutely brilliant soliloquy of Hamlet, Act 2, Scene 2. I have of late, wherefore I know not, lost all my mirth. It's a brilliant, brilliant piece of acting.
You're a man of many parts, aren't you? I'm going to nominate Independence Day when the president... Why are you laughing? When the president makes this rousing speech saying, "This is our Independence Day," sets me off.
I thought you were going to do Finding Nemo or something. The Lion King.
No, well, look, thank you all very much indeed. Really good panel this evening. Really enjoyed it. Monday's panel with Simon Marks, because I'm off for 2 weeks on holiday. Simon Marks will be joined by the Conservative MP and former Cabinet Minister Kit Malthouse, Labour's Brian Leishman, and the Observer columnist Martha Gill. Coming up in the next hour, we're going to return to the subject of the assisted dying bill, because opposition to this bill, which would legalise assisted dying in England and Wales, seems to be growing among MPs. Now, it was supported by 330 MPs last year, passing its first major vote in the House of Commons with a majority of 55. But at least a dozen MPs who backed it or abstained in November have now said they're likely to vote against it. Well, Harriet, where are you on this?
I'm a definite no.
Definite no, Rachel?
I've been yes so far.
So far?
Yeah.
Indicating a little bit of doubt.
I think you've got to apply yourself every time to the debate. Well,
we're going to ask you, what would you say to an MP who's wavering? 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and...
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, health, defence and transport are all seen as the big winners from today's spending review, which the Chancellor claims will renew Britain. Rachel Reeves says the NHS is to receive a £29 billion a year rise in funding. But police chiefs have slammed ministers over a lack of investment for them. The Police Federation's Tiff Lynch told LBC this evening that police are having to do more work for less, and it's not working.
Chief constables need to come out and tell the public specifically what we are going to be capable of doing and what we're not going to be capable of doing. But ultimately, when this does start to fail, and it's failing already, the Chancellor needs to come out and explain to the public why the police is failing them.
Police in Northern Ireland say a significant operation is in place in Ballymena tonight as they request help from other police forces across the UK. It follows 2 nights of violence in which 32 officers were hurt. First Minister Michelle O'Neill's condemned what she calls pure racism after attacks targeting migrants. Jackson Minford's the mayor of Mid and East Antrim.
I spoke to local people in there who are very scared. People are labelling their houses, I'm Filipino, I'm British or whatever. That should not happen in this day and age, that people have to label their house. But there was a lot of properties damaged randomly.
Former movie producer Harvey Weinstein's been found guilty of committing a criminal sexual act in a retrial in New York. The case was being retried after an appeals court overturned his 2020 conviction last year. The UK has agreed to a fluid border between Gibraltar and Spain as part of a post-Brexit deal. It would mean there will be dual border control checks